today talking about Back to the Future Part 2, where we go to the future of 2015, so 10 years ago now. It's hard to imagine, but celebrating the 40th anniversary of a film that goes 30 years into the future can have unexpected sort of consequences and thoughts. I want to lead us into our discussion by talking about obviously the future being such a big catch to the film. A reason to see it is, we spent so much of the first film stumbling between present day and the past, but now this opportunity to go to the future. So let's explore that a little bit. Pam, what are your thoughts on sort of the future as depicted in Back to the Future Part 2 to lead us in?
Well, I think it's interesting that the initial future is, I think it's what you are expecting it to be, right? I mean, obviously, like, we were both too young to really look to the future in such a fantastical way. But, before Marty gets his hands on that sports almanac and completely changes the trajectory of the future, it's bright, it's shiny, it's a utopia. There's all this like fun new tech, like the self-lacing shoes, the self-adjusting jackets, the hoverboards. It's like everything you want it to be. What about you? What do you think?
I like it, and I think that it's an absolutely wild circumstance in the plot that they go to a cafe that is nostalgic about the 80s when the films were made in the 80s. Like, how self-aggrandizing do you have to be? But yet there's also that ounce of forethought where people in the 80s were looking at it going, I bet people will be nostalgic for the 80s later. It's like the idea of looking at your own era of time that you're in and going, yeah, we did do some things right, or some things iconic, or something like Michael Jackson, who we know that this is a big enough star already that it's going to be a big deal to have a lot of Michael Jackson merch in this throwback 80s cafe. It's funny the way the film plays with nostalgia for the 80s in the 2015s when the films are 80s movies. So I'm just very big a fan. And in the same way that the first film was almost for consumers, right? The DeLorean is a specific brand of car. Marty McFly's Nikes, Marty McFly's the JVC camcorder. These are brands, Sony, that are all over the first film. Seeing where those brands would be 30 years from now, like the lacing shoes, like you said, is very cool for films that are kind of in a way about technology, seeing how that evolves then too. Everything gets an upgrade, everything gets an answer to, where is this now? Where are automobiles? Well, they fly. It's just very exciting and enticing, and I think, to your point, there's this moment of time where we can really appreciate the utopian aspect of it all.
Yeah, and I think that, obviously, a lot of it doesn't come to fruition. We've shot well past 2015 at this point. There's other stuff that I think that, they did have the foresight to, predict how ridiculous sequels would be in the future, like that Jaws part 37. Jaws doesn't have 37 parts, but we do have 10 Fast and Furious movies.
We're quickly getting there.
Exactly. So I think that there's some tongue-in-cheek stuff in there. It's more like little things and stuff like that you can kind of laugh at now because it's pretty spot on, but it's still cool to see what people thought that the future was going to look like. And I think we saw a little bit of that trickle down at the turn of the century with the millennium and Y2K and everything being bright and shiny and about robots and looking to the sky. And that really seeped into everything from, the fashion to pop music with, stuff like Larger Than Life, Backstreet Boys, and Britney being in space for Oops, I Did It Again, and things like that. So
yeah. Oh God, I love that era of space age, late 90s, early thousands space age. Wasn't the name of the album Millennium?
It was,
as well?
Yeah.
It's cool. because you mentioned sort of that look at technology, one of the things I wish would have been more represented in 2015, and I mean in the real world, is that technology where you could see through the shell and see all the circuit boards. I had like that N64 controller that was like Gorilla Purple, and it had,
Yeah, everything. You're right. Everything was see through.
everything was see through for some reason. You could see underneath it. I want
we wanted
the
to see all
movie
those
that's
wires.
a love letter to all the circuitry and all that kind of a thing. But we could talk about that specific aspect all day. I will say the film overall, part two of Back to the Future is darker than the first film.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In I think a crucial way, and it's the plot unfurls at like a breakneck pace. There's really no time to breathe because of everything the movie has to do. In that way, like the first and third films are almost a better movie going experience simply because there are those scenes where you can breathe and think. And I think the second one is so busy getting the characters to where they need to go that can fall by the wayside. But it manages to be, I think, darker and heavier and actually, like, I want to say intimidating by like some of the messages you get out of the second movie. What are your thoughts on the overall darker tone?
I mean, like it's interesting because I think that if we go back to the first movie, right, when we open in teenage Marty McFly's Hill Valley, you can see that the town's a little run down, right? There's graffiti on the walls and things like that, and then he goes back to the past and everything is shiny and new, and I think that we see like that imagery kind of redistributed in the sequel, where the initial future is shiny and new, much like the past is in the first one. But then when Marty goes back as a result of his own flub, it is run down, similar to what his current reality looks like, right? But it's run down in an extreme sort of way, and they obviously don't get into it too much, but you are well aware of the fact that it's a result of a corrupt power being in charge of everything. And they say that they show that more than they tell us that. Yeah. I think and I think that that's really smart because to go back to your point about how fast this movie really moves, they don't have time to go into all the nitty gritty of the politics and, why Biff is a bad leader. You just know through the montage of what we see of his rise to power, and also based on what the world looks like around Marty when he gets there, that it's not a great place to live. And it's as a result of the fact that Biff has all this power now. And it really kind of makes you think too about like what might have happened if Marty had that power too. Like, who's to say that world wouldn't still look like that?
It's a heck of a thing to think about too. And I love your viewing it through the lens of like, do we as a society, like as a progress report on how healthy the society is how clean our streets are, and it's and it the 50s so idealized, but like it was a simpler time and people weren't malicious and negligent of their environment. In the first film, that woman running around, save the clock tower, because grassroots collecting for money is the only way civic engagement works. And in the future, we presumably have fixed that, only to see in the alternate version that the crime that's rampant, nobody's on the streets unless you're up to no good, kind of, especially after hours, and the way in which that has been tainted. So there's a lot of like commentary that's on not just the individuals and the characters in the film, like how bad Biff is, but also on us as a society and how we respond to external factors like that, and how I think public perception or discourse of like, do you treat your environment with pride? Do you have a lot of pride? Does it extend to others? Does it extend to your neighborhood? Does it extend to your city? Or is there sort of an animalistic everyone's in it for themselves kind of thing, which is what it seems like the prevalence of Bifco in the alternate 1985 seems to have done to this town. And there's mentions of other vices like, legalized gambling, a lot of motorcycle biker gangs, which I actually think are cool. But several of the members you can see in the background are carrying AK-47s. And
Right. It's like a lawless land.
it's very lawless. Yeah. And to think that those people are empowered, you can easily see them, like the drive-by shooting that we witness on Strickland's house.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
to the point where it's like that, there's drive-by shootings. It's insane.
Like, it's amazing that we even see the police cutout of where bodies were and not still find bodies there because cars are left burning out in the streets. And, I think that getting into the darker sort of themes of this movie reminds me of a story I want to tell about a convention that I went to, which was, it was actually a Star Trek convention run by Creation in, I want to say, like 2012 era. And I was invited because somebody knew that I was a big Back to the Future fan, and Christopher Lloyd was going to be there. And so he played the villain in Star Trek 3, I want to say. But he was asked, I went to the con, I attended a Q&A, and he's always been asked, what's his favorite of the Back to the Future movies to work on, and it's no surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise, and it's certainly on the record plenty of times, that his favorite film is the third one. As an actor, he got the most to do. Getting to play Doc in Love was very interesting. Can't wait to talk about that storyline with you, Pam, on our Part 3 episode. But the question during the Q&A that I saw him get asked was, we know movie 3 is your favorite. If you had to justify the second film being the strongest entry into the series, what would you say? So it's literally like, we're going against your inkling. What do you have to say about the second film and why it too deserves a place among the trilogy? And what an interesting question, first of all. You gotta love at conventions when somebody throws a curveball like this, or really you don't get the sense that anybody really thought to ask it this way. And Christopher Lloyd answered the question by saying, because the first film, was so hopeful, and the films in a way, reminisce and explore the possibilities of time travel, the second film, I summarized this, I think I paraphrased this in our earlier discussions, but the second film is a natural progression of what happens when you give human beings this power. And it's a cautionary tale, but what Chris Lloyd said was that it was a natural kind of evolution of the concept, and a dark, yes, but kind of thoughtful rumination on how somebody with that amount of power could be corrupted. And so he said, this second film, in exploring some of these darker topics, ends up being very interesting, where they could have just, maybe played all the hits, even though they do quite a lot of that. The whole dark part of it that may turn some people off actually is a reason to look closer, and is a reason to, I think, herald the second film. And I said to Pam, like last time, that I gradually went from viewing the second film as my absolute favorite, ride or die, I would watch it hundreds of times as a kid, to gradually being turned off by the darkness of it. And I think that while it's important to kind of always view things that you get enjoyment out of, I now have kind of come back around and gone, you know what? They were so real for that. They were so real for kind of exploring what it looks like when somebody bad like Biff gets a time, machine. And what happens if any one person, whether it's Biff or whether it's Marty, has the means to make all of their dreams come true at the expense of others. And so, what? Now that I thinking about it in that context, the second film is amazing at doing that, right?
Yeah, and I think it also shows, what we really see in terms of Marty's character growth is almost an exercise in self-control, and him finally realizing that, he thinks that, bringing the sports almanac back for himself and, making sure that he has access to a small fortune is only going to affect him, but he doesn't realize the consequences of that those actions can have, right? And instead of like kind of throwing himself into a time loop, which they could have easily done, right? They could have easily just followed a storyline where it was almost like a Groundhog Day, where he keeps repeating the same mistake and different things happen throughout the mistake, but then the conclusion is always the same as the consequences of his actions. I kind of love that they didn't do that, that he realizes right away, no, this is bad, and I can't even like trust myself to to harness this much power in terms of ensuring my own destiny. Like, there are some things you have to let time play out on its own for, and this is one of those things, and it's better for everybody if nobody has access.
Yeah, and the stakes go so hard. His father has been murdered, and his mother is married to the bad guy. Like, literally, like,
yeah.
having
She's a slave.
Yeah. And the film, in its own, like, again, charming way, manages to show an absolutely harrowing portrayal of what the inner workings of their relationship must be, including the cosmetic surgery he's made Lorraine get. Like, it's just, it's insane when you really look at what this film is. And Thomas F. Wilson is 100% not only a nice guy in person, but the star of the sequel, if not both sequels, because of the many layers to his performances, getting to reprise the 1950s bully Biff. I think he really shines in the 55 segment of part 2. But in addition, we mentioned, playing Griff and playing alternate 1985 Biff as well, who has to level with Marty and try and kill him. You know, all of these elements that work in this film, like, I think Tom Wilson carries this film, and it's crazy because the first film doesn't have a villain, but the second film does. And he plays it so well. Like, it's almost like Scooby-Doo hokey, and I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling kids. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Like, it's just he is just a true textbook archetype villain, down to like the skulking around as old man Biff. He does. And those are some of, you're right, those are some of my most favorite parts, is seeing him interact with his younger counterpart, and the younger counterpart being suspicious, that he's just like, look, kid, just like, listen to me.
The idea that you would meet yourself 60 years in the future and hate your younger self, like, exactly. That you have all the wisdom that the years provide, and you're just like, you sound like a damn fool when you say it wrong. You know, it's like, be able to just like, oh my God, like, I would hate my younger self, or I was such a shithead, or a butthead.
Right, exactly.
Is delightful. The things that they're able to accomplish in the second film, and the cartoonery, the buffoonery is makes watching it enjoyable, but it doesn't diffuse the stakes at all, right? So I think that's the reason you're able to tolerate some of the awful things that Biff is doing, is because it's played with heart by the actor. But and the breakneck pace of the film makes it so you're not really thinking about what, like, Lorraine and Biff's relationship must be like. You know, seeing them fight once is enough to get it, but you know, if this were a TV series or something, you get some really dark episodes that would just bring the mood down, as opposed to the 15-20 minute segment that we get. And it's like, okay, so that gives Marty what to do and how to get out of there, but being presented with this idea that first you see the Cubs win the World Series, which happened 1 year later in 2016.
It did, yeah.
Oh, I know that there was a lot of news coverage.
Are the Cubs gonna make it?
Hey, and they almost did too. They got really close in 2015. But actually in 2016 we go on to win the World Series. To see Marty take that, decide, what's wrong with placing a couple bets, to only find yourself in an alternate timeline where your dad's been murdered and the school bully is married to your mom and she's like a slave, and your kids are in bad shape and the whole world's a mess. Imagine as a teenager, Marty's still playing a teenager, getting confronted with, you can actually really mess stuff up like that. The other conceit of the almanac that I like is it sort of proves Doc Point from the first film, in which he says no one should know too much about their own future. It's, the physical embodiment of be careful, because where it seems so innocent, there's even a line from Doc. He's like, I invented the time machine to discover where we're going. What does it all mean? But you can very really cause harm with it. So I think that getting back to what Chris Lloyd had said about the understanding the stakes is I think he said something about balance, and you can't appreciate the highs if you don't also experience the lows. I think that's what he ended up saying about that answer question. And I actually completely agree with it. The second film is not as funny as certainly the third one and probably the first one, but at the same time, there are parts of it that do make it stand out and that are unique to the trilogy that, while darker in tone, I think are very kind of important in viewing the trilogy.
Yeah, and I know we need to move on as well to talk about part 3 and give that its moment to shine as well. But the one last thing I will say about part 2 is that I think you're right. I think it's really easy to focus on the darker elements, and that middle part really does stick out because it's so jarring in comparison to the rest of the series as a whole. But I think that it was very smart of them to then send Marty back to 1955 and have that be where the film really climaxes, because it's a palate cleanser to everything else. And then going from 1955 to realizing that he's fixed things so that the future is not this really dark dystopia, is just like a nice way to kind of ease ourselves back into the brighter timeline, the timeline that should exist. Yeah, exactly.
And the third part of part 2 is maybe the most enjoyable part too, because of how 1955's nostalgic it is, but also how it runs circles around the first film. And getting to see that Biff's gang is trying to jump him, but not him, the original him that's about to play Johnny B. Good on stage, is like just a funny hijink to have to like navigate around. Like they didn't seeing the second film work over top of the work that was done in the first film is, first of all, fun because it's timey-wimey, but second of all, fun because it has real stakes for the characters that are doing this. And it's like the I forget what the scope version is that they talked about that allows actors to show up as themselves multiple times, but that technology really, really, really works. And although we've seen it with like old Biff and young Biff, where I think it really, really works is in the rest of the 50s with, again, him being up on stage and the guys having to just watch Marty climb the scaffolding above where he himself is playing Johnny B. Good and just work in the 3D spaces. You buy it. You buy that both characters are there. Doc getting to talk to himself for the first time, having an experience of being, a duplicate in a timeline. And so the film just does so much and it explores so much, but there's still that heart. And I think the tight writing, it's very economical. Again, the first film having, consisted of pretty much everything being a setup and a payoff. The second film has a lot of that too, where it's even setting up a lot of the stuff in part 3 because they were filmed back to back. So heck of a thing. And I just really love part 2. I think that part of watching it in this era, it had been a couple of years, and seeing the lawlessness and how, it's off screen, but how those people were empowered to be lawless as a result of a mega corporation and a sort of real estate guy mogul who is inherently corrupt, then affecting the local government and city around him. He says at one point to Marty, "I own the police," and that he basically did get away with murder of George McFly. All of this has staggering implications to modern day politics, I think, in the U.S. It's a harrowing look at something that, even though the film might have been cool for predicting the Cubs winning the World Series within a year of when they actually did, I think that the second film will continue to be seen as predicting actually a whole hell of a lot about the dark zeitgeist and the ways in which the world can be, I think, affected negatively by greed, which is what Biff ultimately does. So I got a lot out
tale in a different way.
Yeah, I got a lot out of this watching of Back to the Future 2. I was actually kind of straight up blown away by it on this rewatch. So any final thoughts on part 2?
I think I kind of gave mine already, but yeah, it is like to your point, just really cool to be able to look back at these movies and find that you can grasp onto an element that you didn't realize you were missing before. I think that that adds to the rewatchability factor. If anyone is listening and hasn't watched these in a while, it's worth going back.
Agreed completely. And the second film, talking about big endings, ends with Marty now reintroducing himself to 1950s Doc, who promptly faints. But this idea that by the end of the second film, Marty is back where he was at the end of the first film, but with new purpose, is very exciting. And you're like, oh, we liked, I think, the 50s version of Doc in the first film. He's most of the movie's Doc. He's the one we get to know. So the idea of getting to see more of him is a reason to tune in for part 3. So that concludes our second Back to the Future discussion, or Back to the Future 2 discussion. And we are going to hear now from our sponsors.